It's the 1st of August, first Monday of the month, time for the Bush Telly Book Club. And as I say, we're looking at a book by Ian Idriess. Now, from the 1930s through to the 50s, Idriess was Australia's best-selling author by far. And you'd have to say that a lot of people really learnt their Australian history from Ian Idriess. He's a prolific writer, and the books he wrote, some of them became classics, and I've read a few of them. Flynn of the Inland, Laster's Last Ride, 40 Fathoms Deep, which is a book about pearl fishing in Broome. But this month I've chosen The Cattle King, chiefly because I hadn't read it before. It's the story of Sir Sidney Kidman, and I picked it because it's a classic. It had over 40 reprints. And we've got a panel standing by. Tom Stockwell runs the Sunday Creek Station near Daly Waters. He's the chairman of the Katherine branch of the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association. Hi, Tom.
Yeah, good morning.
And Rob Cootes is an Idriess tragic. He runs a website devoted to Idriess. Hi, Rob.
Good day, Michael.
And shortly we'll be joined by Philip Mead, who's a Professor of Australian Literature at the University of Western Australia. Rob, let's settle his surname first. I say Idriess. I know other people say Idri. The spelling is Idriess. How do you say it?
Well, Michael, for a start, there is a strong suggestion that it was not Ian Idriess's father's name. There's a suggestion that he called himself Jones. He was Jones, and he called himself Idriess after the district in which he lived when he came to Australia. But pronunciation...
you mean his dad did?
His dad did.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, around, it's pronounced a number of different ways. Around the Daintree, it's called Idriess. The Australian Dictionary of Biography calls him Idriess. I call him Idriess, as some of the family do, some of his descendants. Others of the family call him Idriess. So it's not clear.
Okay, we'll call it. Well, you stick with yours and I'll stick with mine, and we'll.
That's the way to go.
We'll battle on. Let's sketch in the details of his early life. He was born in Waverley, in New South Wales, in 1889.
Yes,
and his childhood he came to sort of traumatic sort of conclusion.
Oh, yes, it did. He had, in contrast to Kidman, Jack had a good childhood, a good supportive family. They lived in Lismore and a number of other places until Broken Hill. The time at the end of his Broken Hill period was really tragic. On the day of his last assayer's exam, he drank some creek water and got typhoid. His mother kept him at home, nursing him, and until he had to go to hospital, he was taken to hospital in a wheelbarrow. While he was in hospital, his mother died. He never saw her again.
She died of typhoid, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
Yeah.
And that was in November. In January, his father got him on a train and took him to Sydney, where he lived with his step-grandmother for just a short while. But Jack never got over that. He blamed himself for his mother's death, and he couldn't stand staying in Sydney. He tried to run away once. He ran away to sea. But his illness caused him to come back to his step-grandmother. But then finally, calling himself Jack, he headed off with his swag into the bush, and it was many, many years before he lived in a house. Once again, another parallel with Kidman.
Yes, there are lots of parallels between the two men's lives, aren't there?
There are.
I mean, it's always interesting when you read someone who writes a biography who in some sense is exploring aspects of his own life, using the one life to stand for the other. Now, as you say, although we all know him as Ian Idriess or Idriess, he was known as Jack.
Yes, he was. He called himself Jack all the time until he started publishing books in 1927. All his contributions to the Bulletin were under the pen name of the Gouger or Up North, or sometimes later on he used ILI, but he called himself Jack in the bush, and many people that knew him as Jack in the Bush had a disconnect between knowing him then and the writer of the books.
Well, the family obviously liked to play around with their names. If Dad was Mr. Jones and he changed it to Idriss, and Eon Idriss kept changing his name, they like to play fast and loose with their names. Now, Philip Mead is Professor of Australian Literature at the University of Western Australia. Hi, Philip.
Hi, Michael. How are you going?
Nice to have you with us. Are you the
Are
you the only Professor of Australian Literature?
No. There's a few of us. There's a small band of us. There's Rob Dixon at the University of Sydney. He's the oldest person in that position, and there's one or two others at the University of Queensland. And
we need more. We don't want just one or two others. We want a whole
we do indeed.
Phalanx of professors of Australian literature. Bring it back. Now, where does he fit in, Philip? I mean, I think of him as being part of what I think of as the walkabout school. You know, Frank Clune, Ernestine Hill, George Farwell, people like that. Where would you place him?
Yeah, he's one of those important popular writers in Australian literary history, particularly from the period of the Depression through to the Second World War. Although he publishes and writes well into the 50s and 60s. What is important for, I think, Michael, is for becoming a very high-selling, best-selling Australian author. That's one of the things he does. He helps Angus and Robertson, our native grown publishing house, grow and establish itself. But he's also one of those writers who, along with those you mentioned, but also Frank Clune and Evie Timms and Colin Simpson and so on, who tell the stories of Australia to itself during those decades of the late 20s and 30s and 40s. In other words, he tells the story of Flynn of the Inland, of Lassiter's Last Ride, and of Kidman to an audience which is eager to hear the stories about its own heritage, its own growth, its own nation, I guess.
Yes, he's giving a nationalist account of Australian history long before that's come to the Academy, really.
Yeah, that's right, and that's one of the interesting things about The Cattle King is that he makes a very clear parallel between Kidman as a person and the growth of Australia. That's very clear in his account of Kidman's life. I think it's one of the interesting things about the book.
I think that's a characteristic of a lot of his books, that the story he tells is a kind of metaphor for what Australia is and what it's capable of becoming.
That's right, exactly. Kidman, leaves home in 1870, just as the first wave of exploration is finished. Burke and Wills was only five years previously. He talks about, meeting people who can remember Burke and Wills. In fact, there's a character in The Cattle King who who was at Eureka. So that earlier stage of the heroic stage, if you like, of in his view of Australian history has passed, and it's now the beginning of the great era of a pastoral expansion and so on. And Kidman's the paradigm of that, the symbol of it, through to, he stops at 1901 when Kidman's about 40 and says, he still feels young and yet he's established so much. In other words, Kidman is representing the new young country, Australia.
Yeah. You're on the Book Club on ABC Radio National's Bush Telegraph. Let's hear the opening paragraph of The Cattle King. This is from an ABC recording made by Roger Cardwell.
It was nearly dawn, though dark and cold in the loft. A rat squeaked and scuttled along a rafter. The boy shivered. He detested rats. He was rolling a tiny swag, just a threadbare rug and towel. He did the job neatly, strapping the folds tightly. Then stood in shirt and trousers, worn boots, and a battered felt hat that quite hid his wavy brown hair. He listened, his brown eyes serious. Barely 13, yet determination showed on that childish face. Not a sound. He clutched his pocket. Yes, it was there. 5 shillings. All the money he had in the world.
And he sets off to meet his destiny on the back of a one-eyed horse. Rob, what do you think he's trying to do in this book? What's he just trying to do?
Well, Michael, I believe that he succeeded in showing people or describing the outback, the mountains, the animals, the birds and trees, with never flagging enthusiasm, but putting Kidman, the size of the man, into that environment. Jack always wrote about the outback through the eyes of somebody who really appreciated it and lived it, and he recorded the lives of in his diaries of everybody he met, from Afghan camel drivers through to Kidman, and I think in that the book was a success.
He's not so interested in the psychology of Kidman, is he? I mean, it's not a complex psychology. This man is your off-the-shelf hero. He's a small boy from humble beginnings who pluckily sets off into the world and conquers it because he's just got these marvellous qualities. Really, Idriss's interest is in laying out the landscape the man goes through and talking about the potential of the country for the sort of development that Idriss wants to see happen. He's a kind of case study of possibilities. Yes,
yes, that's true. Jack really admired people who were out there and did things, and in that he would have loved to have known Kidman in his prime.
Tom Stockwell, let's bring you in here. You're at Sunday Creek Station, not quite in Kidman country. Just tell us where you are.
Oh, well, we're about we're 600k south of Darwin, but we're probably 150, 200 k's north of Kidman's most northern held property on the Barkly, and we're due east of VRD, which he also owned for a good while here.
And when you read this account of the growth of the cattle industry on this grand scale, do you recognise it as the same industry that you're involved in today?
Oh, absolutely. It's actually exactly the same story. I mean, on different scales these days, you know, and the stories are smaller. But it's it's actually it was really scary rereading the book after all these years and just seeing how much is the same. You were saying that it was all about the country. I actually, you know, it was about the country, but to me, it was all about the people. And the interesting thing for me is just, you know, the same people are there, and in part for me, the book is almost, well, it could be a textbook for people that had dreams of doing it. But to me, there's a lot there about the values of the bush and how you do business and live your life in the bush. And I actually, it's quite a strong parable, I think, you know, and a lot of those values that he ascribes to Kidman and they talk about in the different way he does his business, I mean, they're still really strongly held values in the bush.
When you say it's a parable, it is a kind of Pilgrim's Progress story, isn't it, where this young boy sets off on a journey and he meets various people and everybody he meets teaches him something.
Yeah, and that's it, and I think that, I mean, in a way, it's all, you know, and that's probably why it had such appeal in its day, particularly because it was talking about real people, and to me, it's a language that everyday Australians could understand as well, you know, and associate with, probably.
It's also a boy who looks at the country with an eye to business. I mean, every encounter he has is a business opportunity, but it doesn't make him seem greedy. It makes him seem resourceful, as though, you know, he's creating prosperity rather than accumulating wealth, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, look, I mean, I know the northern part of the country that he's talking about from the channels in Queensland North, and I mean, you don't want to underestimate just the intellect or the memory, the vision, and I expect the energy of Kidman. I mean, he is to, I guess, the Australian cattle industry what Buddy Bradman is to cricket. You know, I mean, he's just so far ahead of anybody else. It's probably not funny, but you know, like it's a really solid story, really, about how one should lead one's life in the game. You know.
I'll just play another little section from it. This is this reflects on the importance of water in this part of the country. This is Bush Telly on ABC Radio National, and we're talking about The Cattle King by Ion Idriss.
Very quiet by the fire among the rocks, the boy lay thinking. Water, the most precious thing on earth. It was life. Lack of it meant death to every living thing. This realization was eventually to mean fortune to him. Harry had given in. If he'd given in too, they would never have found the water. They would be dead. He let the lesson sink in.
Never give in. I will never give in.
Yes, and that really becomes a kind of chorus throughout the book, I will never give in, and also one of the great themes in Idriss's work, which is water is life. Tom, where you are, there must be even less water than the country that he was exploring.
Well, yes and no. I mean, we're in the monsoonal zone, so we get big rain. The reason that our little family is where it is because there was no water here on the surface. So that's why this was one of the last places to be developed. But eventually we found water. So there's no doubt. There's no doubt that his business about water and the stuff about having the dual chance of the floods and being able to find underground water through Artesian Basin is, it's been the key to all things, really.
Rob Coots, we've had a caller ring in saying that her mother worked with Idriss and that the name was always pronounced Idriss. And, he worked with a mother, that's right, the caller worked with Idriss, I see, and her mother was never corrected. His friends call him Jack and his wife called him Sunshine, Rob.
Look, I hadn't heard the Sunshine bit, I've got to tell you.
Well, our wives all have nice names for us. Perhaps we don't want them broadcast on national radio. It's just an intimate thing. Philip, do you find him an attractive bloke, Kidman?
Yeah, I think he's certainly. It's hard to get to know him as a person through the Cattle King, as you say, Michael. It's a hero that we're hearing about and or reading about, and we know from history that he is a dynamic, incredibly energetic and capable figure in Australian history. But I must say, as I've been listening, I mean, you can't help think, and I'm sure this is in Jack Idriss's mind as he's writing about Kidman. I can't help thinking of Patterson and Lawson and going back to those decades just before Federation and the debate about the bush, the city and the bush, because I think there's a very kind of deliberate agenda there with Idriss in terms of presenting the outback and Australian bushman as positive, outgoing, energetic, successful. You know what I mean, in the Patterson tradition and the Vision
Yes.
Splendid, as opposed to, because you come across references in the Cattle King to Hungerford, and I don't think that's any mistake. Hungerford is that tiny little town on the Queensland-New South Wales border, which is in fact the title of one of Lawson's most desolate stories.
The wilderness there didn't even howl, he says. If it howled, it would have been a relief.
I don't think that's any coincidence. I think one of the things in Idriss's mind, there's a lot of things going on in the book, is that sense of wanting to present a story which is and in fact there's stories about women, drovers' wives at home surviving and, against the odds. I think there's a very deliberate attempt there to tell a positive story about, in the Patterson tradition, about the pastoral expansion of Australia, the settlement of Australia, if you like.
And very consciously in dialogue with that earlier tradition, which of course is very well known in the bush.
Very much. Yeah, exactly.
I see Idriss more as a kind of fusion of the two, because I reckon that in Idriss there is a kind of love-hate relationship with the outback, because he does see the outback as a cruel environment as well. This slogan that goes through his work is water is life, and when you're in a place where there is no water, then you die in the silence. And there is a sort of argument that almost goes, the bush left to itself can be a cruel place, but through pioneering and through belief and through the kind of Kidman grit, we can transform the land in order to redeem it and make it productive.
Yeah, that's one of the crucial things about Idriss and Kidman, isn't it? And the parallels is that they feel that you can change the whole of Australia. I mean, don't forget that you'd know about this, Michael, from your own work, one of the ways in which Idriss becomes a household name is through his theories of the Great Boomerang, and the idea of turning the northern rivers and the northeastern rivers of the Dividing Range inwards, and running, trying to, with gigantic engineering works, to turn the whole of the river systems of Australia inwards rather than outwards to the coast, and that was a vision of, a continent-wide vision of changing a whole environment, a whole geography, and Kidman held out that kind of hope for Idriess in a way, because of the, in the book there's this emphasis on the three rivers and the geographical understanding that Kidman has about the Channel Country and how it works geographically, topographically, and I think Idriess wants to take that vision kind of another step forward. In fact, we get the Snowy Mountain scheme, which is a kind of mini version of it in a way, but at the other end of the continent. His idea, like Kidman's, was that you could change this place, this country, this continent in the most fundamental geographical kind of ways. I mean, the Great Boomerang is predicated on building basically a mountain range across the just south of the Gulf Carpentaria, and it's that sort of can-do, extreme kind of sort of attitude towards the place Australia, which I think probably nowadays is seen as overweening and just impractical and probably environmentally very suspect. But it's part of continuum. I think that's one of the things that Idriess sees in Kidman, is that same desire to change the whole country.
Yes, he's a major figure in creating kind of national enthusiasm about hydroengineering as a force of national redemption. It's Bush Telly on ABC Radio National. You're in the book club, and my guest, Philip Mead, who I'm just talking to now, Professor of Australian Literature at the University of WA. Rob Coots, who's an Idriess tragic, and in fact he runs a Butte website which is devoted to Idriess. And Tom Stockwell is with us. He's chairman of the Katherine branch of the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association. He runs Sunday Creek, which is near Daly Waters. Tom, I'm not sure that Kidman is that well remembered in town, but his name still lives on in the pastoral industry, does it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it lives on in the Kidman Company, of course, which is still operating from those first days, and still a family company, basically. But I mean the Kidmans of, the stories of that of Kidman, like Save a Match and Buy a Station, and the One-Eyed Horse, and the first time any boy buys his first head of cattle or his first little bit of land, you're good on you, Kidman, you've done well, sort of thing, and so I mean it's part of the fabric, I think. Yeah, part
of the vocabulary too, you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So there are still young Sid Kidmans out there with the same kind of dream, are they?
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Well, there are. The first thing I when I started reading it again as a boy, when Kidman was a boy, I was saying, geez, I know a couple of young fellas just like that, energetic, just ask every question under the sun and just sit there and listen to people, and they're all, so, and as you go, and there are, people that you'd call captains of industry now, some of the bigger fellas that are doing the same sort of philanthropic or community type things quietly behind the scenes, just greasing the wheels of the region and the communities, and just behaving in that same sort of manner. So I think it's all part of the fabric of the outback, really, still.
He's also one of those cattlemen from the top end who had quite a strong relationship with Aboriginal people, Tom, especially with Aboriginal stockmen, and he dates that. Well, the book dates that from his teenage years.
Yeah, well, and again, I think particularly with the older generation of cattlemen, I mean that's not an unusual story. I think it was probably a fairly honest portrayal of it. By and large, a mutual respect, and I guess that's one of the sad things that's largely been lost.
It certainly is. Rob, would you like to come in on this?
Yes, I think that Kidman. He's certainly not, as Jill Bowen in the other book said, a forgotten king.
Well, we should say that Jill Bowen's book is a biography of him.
That's right, yes, and I don't believe he's forgotten at all. I think he's a towering figure in Australian history, and I think that's what Jack was trying to get across, that image of Kidman, and certainly the heroic figure is very important to him. How
accurate is the book? Can we rely on it?
I think given the constraints of time that Jack had, he had just 10 months to write this book, and he was finalising Man Tracks and writing 40 Fathoms Deep and preparing for Over the Range. The Yellow Joss was published in the same year. He had all these books on the go. This was his 11th book in 9 years. I think, and he didn't get cooperation from the Kidman family.
Okay, you're building in all these caveats, but how accurate is the book?
I think, in the words of Mark Twain, he stretched things a bit, but mainly he told the truth.
Philip, how would you describe it as a genre? Can you put it somewhere? Because it is hard to tell what truth value to give to this writing, because it's a little bit like a novel, it's a little bit like a history book. It's hard to quite know what this book is.
Yeah, that's why it's interesting, Michael. It's, I don't know, these days we might call it faction, something like that. It's a semi-fictionalized account of a real man's life. It's in other words, it's a biography, but it doesn't present itself as, with the kind of writing that in the way that a biography is usually written, with those extracts that you had, being read, for example. It sounds very much like a novel, doesn't it? It's a sort of uneasy bit of writing in that sense. And apropos of what Rob was saying, he did have difficulties with the book. He interviewed Kidman a number of times, but there were problems there because Kidman was basically on his deathbed and was very hard of hearing, and he didn't get a lot of cooperation from the Kidman company in terms of the dates that he wanted for the purchase of properties and so on, all that sort of stuff that he needed that would have been good to put in the book. So I think he had to decide on a less factual account and a more not imaginary, but a kind of visionary account of Kidman the hero, I think, given what he knew about him and what people told him. It's a legend, I suppose. It's a legend.
It's a legend.
That's like the legend of Lassiter, which is again based on a lot of factual and archival material that Idriess used. He turns his real life material he just gives it a little nudge into the legendary, I think.
Tom Stockwell, we're almost out of time, but I gather that your copy, when we asked you to read this, your copy was in bits. Where did you get your copy that you actually read?
Well, I read the first half from the mine that had been returned half full, and in the end I rang around and emailed all my neighbours, and everybody had a copy, but no one could find it, and eventually somebody dragged it out of the shipping container that they'd come across with Queensland, and they were selling some cattle, so they put it in the road train and dropped it off on the mailbox on the way past. So that's how I finally got my copy.
See, that's an epic story. That's the kind of Australia that Ian Idriess dreamt of.
Yeah.
I wish I'd been able to give you one, Tom.
But anyway, no, so that's... it's an important book for us, I think.
Well, thanks, gentlemen. It's been a lovely conversation. Philip Mead is Professor of Australian Literature at the University of WA. Rob Cootes is an Idriess tragic. He runs a website that's devoted to Ian Idriess, and we'll put a link to that on our website. And Tom Stockwell runs the Sunday Creek Station, which is near Daly Waters. And that's the program for today.